everyone, and welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm going to start this off as I often do. Well, for starters, we are in the early days of our 8th year of doing this weekly podcast. So we celebrated 7 years a couple of weeks ago, and so we're working on our 8th year. Very exciting. If you like this podcast, please review us on Apple Podcasts so that other people can find us. We have a really packed show today. We are doing another segment in our series on financial aid awareness in honor of February, which is Financial Aid Awareness Month. And we're also going to be talking about planning college visits. So for those of you who are getting started in the process or have students who are getting started in the process, we're going to be talking about actually getting to some campuses, which we can hopefully all start to do now. But before we get to that, we are starting to see some schools, some colleges over the last couple of years who've been offering students an opportunity to start their college year abroad. It's something that it's been around for a little bit, but I think we're starting to see a few more schools offer it. And so we wanted to talk a little bit more about that. And joining me for that conversation is my colleague, who also happens to be a former admissions officer for both Barnard and Bennington colleges, Elise Krantz. Hi, Elise.
Hi, Beth.
Thanks for joining today to talk about this, because I do think sometimes it's a surprise when students get these invitations to start school abroad. In many cases, something they hadn't thought about or said yes to. So I think I'd love to start with, why do colleges offer these programs?
So, if you think of it, it's sort of like a traditional study abroad program that most students would typically do their sophomore year or maybe their junior year of college. But colleges were realizing that they were missing out on the chance to enroll more students, bring them to their off-campus location. They would start their fall semester at one of their international spots, and then they'd be able to continue paying tuition at that point. They'd still be paying for their traditional fees at that point, and then just merge right in with the campus community when they rejoined in the spring. So that may sound um, a little bit cynical, I suppose, in terms of the financial aspect of it, but I do think it started as a chance to find more opportunities to enroll more students. So it did benefit the colleges, but there's certainly a lot of pros from the student standpoint as well.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. The fact is that, yeah, I mean, colleges are businesses, right? So they rarely do they make decisions that aren't driven in part by good business. And while it is good business for the colleges, I agree. I think one of the big pros is that if they only could admit 500 new freshmen, I am using very small numbers here, but, and then doing this abroad now allows them to admit 550 freshmen, right? There are 50 students who otherwise would not have been accepted to this institution. So we talk, or there's a lot of talk about the idea that so many of these colleges are just getting more and more selective, and this is a way to be slightly less selective and open up more spots. So that's the nice view of it, the less totally business driven view of it, but no doubt. But why don't we? I would love to kind of touch on what are some of the colleges that are offering this. Northeastern is the one that immediately came to mind for me because that's the one that I saw probably 10 or more years ago. I worked with a young woman who was admitted to Northeastern but was invited to begin her time there in London rather than on the Boston campus. So I was curious about some other colleges that might be doing that.
Right. So NU actually, I think they were one of the first on the scene. They
I
started,
think
believe
so.
it or not, in 2007 offering this program.
Crazy.
It's been around for a while, and more colleges seem to be adding on. Syracuse was one I've been hearing about for a while too. There are some smaller liberal arts colleges that are offering it, like Colby and Skidmore colleges. But there's also some larger state universities like UNC offers it. And there's American has a brand new program that they're just starting up for a spring semester instead of a fall semester. So it's a pretty wide range of schools, mostly on the selective side, I would say, that are doing it. But small, large, public, private, it's a nice mix.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right, that it would be the more selective because they probably have more students who would want to go there than they have spots available. And so now there's this cool new program. But yeah, the 2007, that doesn't totally surprise me. It's a little scary for me to think about how long ago it was that I worked with that student, but suffice to say that she is well out of college by now. So, without totally dating myself. So, what do you see? We talked about how this is good business and how it's a positive in terms of more students getting accepted. But what in your view are some of the positives of the programs themselves?
So for some students, the idea of being in a very small, intimate environment is a huge pro. Many of these programs are capped at maybe a dozen or so students.
Yeah.
So you're not in a sea of other first years. It's not overwhelming. Yes, you're in a new country with a new culture, but for students who thrive on that sort of adventure, for students who, for whom the traditional campus experience maybe just isn't exciting enough and they just want to boost their experiences a little bit or have the opportunity to do internships or even community service abroad, this jumpstarts that opportunity. So it can be a really exciting standpoint from that. And because they're small, also, you get to know your professors really well. So it can start a nice relationship building from that sense that could then carry on your remaining years.
It feels like kind of a nice transitional period between high school and college, right? Where you're not just simply going from maybe a school where you knew your teachers really well to a school where you don't know anybody, but instead you get placed in this much smaller program where your professors are really involved. So from that perspective, I could see it really being a great way to kind of transition into college life. On the flip side, what do you see as some of the negatives for that?
So certainly students for whom they need a very structured experience where they know exactly where they're going to get their support from academically or even emotionally, students for whom the idea of being plopped in a foreign country without your family, without people I mean, it can be really overwhelming. So a lot of these programs on their websites, on their application, talk about the maturity that's required, the
Mhm.
open-mindedness, the curiosity, the independence. Like you really need to be ready to tackle something this big. I mean, going to college alone is a
Yes.
huge transition. Like even if you're living the good life in a dorm room and you've got, your meal plan, but and then imagining that stress on top of that, being with surrounded by international people, new language, new culture. I mean, it can be overwhelming for some students.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I did study abroad when I was in college, and just getting on the plane to head to I went to Paris, and getting on the plane there, I swear that it wasn't like I had never been anywhere before, but I had never been abroad. And when the doors closed, there was definitely this sense for me of, oh no, like what have I done? What is this going to be like? And I think to your point, for some students, simply going away to college is going to be a huge thing. And to add on top of that, going to another country to start does feel like it could be really daunting for some students. You know, I mean, I think you've already kind of talked about it a little bit, but when you think about students who get this opportunity and you encourage it, what do those students typically have in common where you would think, oh yeah, you'll love this. This would be a good option for you.
So there's a lot of students I've worked with lately that are really interested in foreign languages or other cultures, and they're looking to expand. And the idea of having to wait a few years before they can do that international experience, it's not their first choice. And so the idea that they could really start charting a path for themselves academically that is unique to their specific interests. Also, there are some programs like Tufts' program in particular. It's not just about study abroad and the culture, it's also about social justice. And they're
Mhm.
taking community service is a big piece of that. And so for students who are looking for a really immersive um, and cultural experience, it's really can be fantastic. But it's not for everyone. But and it's certainly a limited number of spots at these programs. But generally speaking, these tend to be really nice choices for students. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this who are looking for maybe a slightly less selective way to get into that dream school,
Right.
because these programs are not as coveted as much as the traditional on-campus experience.
What's your take? So, in many of these applications, they will ask if you are interested, right, in doing this program. You can't typically apply that might be coming, but at the moment, I don't believe you can specifically apply to Northeastern and say, the only way I go to Northeastern is if I get to do this program in London or this program in Greece or wherever in my freshman year. It's more of a, if I can't be admitted to the regular campus or to the traditional campus, I am willing to start in a foreign country. What's your sense of the impact on a student's chances, or maybe you've found new information and in fact you could apply directly and only to that? I
So
don't know.
yeah, I did a little digging. So mostly I was looking at schools that use the Common Application, and this is usually a question that appears on the either academic page or the main page of the application where it says, would you be interested? We have this great opportunity. Here's a link to it. Check this box if you would like to be considered for it.
Hmm.
And that's usually the starting point. So for students who check that box saying, yes, I would be willing to consider this, you're not bound to that option. It's not
Right.
as though you have to go to that study abroad program. If you are admitted to the regular university. But the trick is, though, that if you do check that box, the college has the option to say, we are willing to admit you, but only to that study abroad program. So you don't
Right.
always get the choice. You can always say, no, I don't want to go at all to your school, but sometimes that's the only way you would have the entry point, like your student at Northeastern. It's
Hmm.
either that or nothing. Um,
Right. Well, to that end, I have had the experience where a student will get accepted to that and then say to me, well, I'm going to ask them if I could start on campus instead. What's your take on that? I know
And
what
that
my
doesn't
take on
work.
that is.
It doesn't work. They
Yeah.
they they have a select number of spots, and although it is a very unique and niche type of student, I think who would do well in these programs, they are still small enough for the most part that colleges can fill them pretty well. So it's not as though the acceptance rate for these is so much greater than
Yes.
those for the regular program. It is still a major hurdle to get into these schools at all. And then if you happen to check that box saying, yes, I would consider it, it's maybe going to give you a little bit of an extra boost if they're willing to consider you for that particular program. But it's still going to be a selective overall process. And if you're not interested, don't check the box. I mean, you don't want to be admitted to the school and be sort of pigeonholed into the only abroad option.
Right, right. Two things that come to mind for me about that. The first is I see this as being similar to what Penn State does. So when you apply to Penn State, if you want the main campus, they also ask, would you consider starting in the summer? And because they have a fairly robust summer program. And when we being my son and I attended the information session, they were very clear that you could give yourself two chances to be admitted to the main campus if you check that summer box. So basically, they go through and they take everyone that they can to the main campus, and then they'll take a second pass on the ones who check the box on the summer and admit some from there. So I sort of see these broad programs as being similar to that. Whether or not it actually functions exactly that way, I couldn't say one way or the other, but my guess is that it gets you a second look by checking that box. The second thing is that, very interestingly, I did see some reports on a couple of groups I belong to on social media of students who did not check the box being offered acceptance to an abroad location. Have you heard about that? Any thoughts on that piece?
Right. So this is one of those like, what is happening here, right? I thought I applied to the regular program, and
Mm-hmm.
now all of a sudden they're saying, we would love to have you, but you have to start in
Right.
England or in Italy or in Spain or Ecuador, or wherever.
Which, by the way,
Um,
that all sounds amazing to me.
it
But
does.
I'm
It's
also,
good, right?
I've been to college already, and I'm coming at it from a different perspective. But
Right.
anyway,
So for those students, it's when the admissions officers are reviewing these applications, they may have a real interest in a particular student, but because of the level of competition, because of the limited number of spots that are available on campus, they just don't have the room for that particular student. And so they can say, listen, we really want you here eventually. We
right.
don't have space here, but we have space at this fantastic, beautiful international location. Consider that, my friend. And so it's then up to the student. But if that's the only option that they were offered, it's usually that or nothing.
Right. It's not like I think in all cases, it's not like they would have offered you a spot on the main campus, but then they just decided, oh, well, she checked the box, so I'm going to give her Italy. Or he didn't check the box, but we'd like him. We could put him to the main campus, but we'll just admit him to an abroad campus. It's definitely, I believe, a very thoughtful process. And it's just like what you said, we really want you. In other days, you might have gotten a wait list, right? But here you're getting this offer instead. And, I mean, you don't have to go, to your point, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
And some of the
oh,
programs are just a fall semester, some are a full year, some are just spring. So I would say check out, see what's out there, see what the options are, and if it's a school you really love, I would say it's worth checking the box if you're open to the idea.
right, absolutely. And I guess also noting that even if you don't check the box, you may get that offer, but that's where you kind of can make a decision. And maybe at the end of the day, when the dust settles and you are 6, 7, 8 months older than you were when you initially applied, the idea of starting college abroad might suddenly be more appealing to you anyway. So it's interesting options, interesting times in college admissions. Elise, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure.
All right. Well, we're going to take a very short break. And when we come back, we are continuing our celebration of Financial Aid Awareness Month with more about financial aid, specifically how you can use financial aid offices as a resource to help you through the process. So don't go away.